Welcome to the show, Denise. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I love the topic that we're going to be talking about today and the content that we're going to be talking about today because you have a very interesting transition and we're going to dive into what all of that is, but I think that it's a very real life transition and I am very interested to see what you might have to say about where that transition came from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as far as career-wise, I started my career as a critical care nurse about 30 years ago, which I absolutely loved. I loved medicine. I loved working with the people. And obviously, people who come into the critical care unit are very sick. And I just, what an honor it is to work with people when, they're sometimes at the end of their life, but sometimes really going through a crisis. So I started my career as ICU nurse, and then as I got older, I thought, it's probably time to step away from the hospital, working 12-hour shifts and being on call. So I decided to go back to school and I became a licensed mental health counselor. And what a fascinating transition it is to still work with people, but in a different aspect, focusing on mental health.
Well, Denise, I'll be honest, that's the thing that surprised me the most. So I got to read your book called Healing Your Body by Mastering Your Mind. And that was the thing that surprised me the most was that you had such an extended amount of time in as a registered nurse in conventional medicine, in Western medicine. I don't often see that transition into bridging the gap to the energy side of things as well as the mental and emotional. Mental and emotional, yes, but not so much the energetic bridging.
Yes, and the interesting thing about that is the way that I sort of discovered energy was just sort of working with clients. In medicine, I loved the fact that the body was so sophisticated. If someone was or having came in with some sort of pain or something, it was almost like a mystery or a puzzle. And when you've done it for years and years, it doesn't take long to decide or figure out why they're having this symptom or pain. And then when I got into psychology, I thought seemed very blurry. Like, why is somebody having anxiety? Why are they depressed? Why are they still struggling? And then I realized the more that I did it was the correlation of how the body manifests physically because of what it's going through psychologically or emotionally. And then I started to really dive into energy. Like, why does that happen? And realize that, the actual science behind mental health, which I think a lot of people don't quite bridge the gap between mental health and physical health.
Yeah, and I always say to my clients or anybody that I'm getting into conversation with around health and wellness, and then energetics, is that if you've done all the stuff or you've been implementing the protocols and you've been doing all the things and it's still not working, or there's something else that's still popping up, then it goes deeper than that. And I love that you're bringing that in and really allowing your clients to explore that with you.
Yes. What I hope to accomplish is to teach them how the body cues, in medicine, it's somewhat easy. They either have pain or they have some sort of symptom, and then they understand that something is not right with the body, which is fairly easy to conclude. With mental health, we start to do things like overeat or go to substances or drink too much. And we never realize that the body's trying to cue us that the nervous system, we're just not in balance. There's some sort of unhappiness there. And so these sort of symptoms that we're coming up with, a lot of us don't piece it together that there's something really going on with the body that it's trying to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I see that there are some common themes throughout different periods of life. Do you see that too?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Just if life goes well, certain transitions are difficult. I think every developmental stage has its challenges. And if we don't sort of thrive and work that out, it just sort of carries over to the next phase. And then you have life, with things that happen, and that just can sort of, magnify and become more and more difficult to deal with. And then what happens is the body starts to break down.
Yeah. Well, thinking about that, thinking about the energies of where you are, I want the listeners to get to know you a little bit deeper.
Okay.
Thinking about where you're at right now in the energies and maybe the stage of life you're in, is there a word or a phrase right now that you're really embodying, that you're really striving towards?
Um, I would probably say for me, it's fulfilled.
Mm.
And then it's sort of a very big word, but it's learning to stay present and finding fulfillment in just the little nuances of life and with family, with friends, with working with clients. It's just allowing that experience to just go inside my body and just feel fulfilled.
And how do you feel like you are practicing maybe moments of self-care or moments of mental or emotional shifting to help you embody that a little deeper? Like, are there certain things that you're doing to help you get closer to that?
Yes, in fact, that's an excellent question. One of the things that I find the hardest to help patients or clients understand is the importance of self-care. And what we don't realize is what we think about, whether it's true or we're imagining, the body doesn't know the difference. And so it's so important that we really sort of regulate the mind and our experiences and our emotions. For me, I rephrase a lot. So when something happens to me that I'm not okay with or that makes me suffer, if you will, I realize that there's some sort of meaning in that. And that helps me sort of tolerate discomfort a little bit easier rather than saying, "Oh, I'm so stressed. Why is this happening to me? Why can't my life be better?" I try to understand, like, what can I learn from this experience? Because it's pretty darn painful or it's pretty uncomfortable. And realizing that the universe or God is trying to help me sort of transition through something through this experience. And for me, that really sort of helps.
That's a beautiful perception and the way that you kind of shifted it there because when we can understand a little, it doesn't take away the fact that it's hard, but when we can understand and look at it through a different lens, it's so much easier to feel deep within our souls that everything's going to be okay, i.e., I feel challenged, but I feel fulfilled right now.
Yes. And it's hard to do that if we don't practice self-care.
Yeah.
And one of the questions when I first meet with someone, I'll say, "What are your hobbies?" And I'll say, "Gosh, I don't really have any hobbies." "Do you have a good network of friends?" "Not really. I work all the time." Okay, that's already giving me a really good indication of what's happening because we feel like we can just go through the day and we don't get adequate sleep. We spend too much time on our devices. We don't spend time or make time for our hobbies and exercise. And then we start to break down. The body breaks down physically. We start to mentally have difficulties. We have problems with relationships. And then we're curious to why that is.
And the many facets of self care are really about balancing and managing your energetic system, your subtle body, right? So, can we talk, for those who don't know, could we talk a little bit about this subtle body that self-care impacts? Maybe the chakras, like what that is and
Mhm,
how that plays a role in our everyday living.
mhm. I think an easy way to explain all of this is emotions that we feel have a vibrational frequency. They call it a hertz. And a low vibrational frequency is would we would say about number 20, so at 20 hertz, which is just a feeling of misery. And if anybody has ever felt miserable, you can barely function. And most of us cannot function at a 20 hertz. We want to get on the couch, we don't want to eat. We see this with grief. A lot of times people don't want to do that or don't have the energy to do that. But unfortunately, one of the things that we're seeing now is some people are learning how to actually make it to work when deep within, they're only about a 20 or a 30 hertz. They're miserable. And this is why we're seeing so much suicide, people sort of doing drastic things to find relief because inside emotionally, their vibrational energy is very, very low for whatever reason. For most of us, we start to try to get some energy going, and now we get into things like guilt and anxiety. I feel like we overuse guilt a little bit too much. I mean, guilt should be our moral compass, not for us to take on because we didn't go above and beyond to exhaust ourselves. And we tend to think, oh, I didn't do this and I should have done that and I feel guilty. It's really not an appropriate reason to feel guilt. Anxiety is actually the same vibrational frequency as grief. And if you've ever gone through grief, how difficult is that? I mean, it's so hard on the body, it's so hard on our emotions and our families. And yet, anxiety seems to be something that most people sort of resonate with on a daily basis. And as we continue to get a little bit more energetic momentum, we get into things like anger and ego. And this is when this vibrational frequency starts to bubble up and come out. Maybe in road rage or irritability, or maybe I tell somebody what I really think about them. Not a good time to speak, but we do. And even if we're right, it's usually not received well. And so all of these low vibrational frequencies really cause the mind to get overactive. And if you think about it, when you're in these energetic areas, all we do is think about ourselves. We pull energy to ourselves. I'm stressed. I'm worried. I feel guilty, whatever we're saying. And this is when addictions start to creep in because the body now is really overwhelmed from what the mind is giving it. It really is not really happy energetically. Disease or illness is likely to start to creep in. You know, illness needs a low energetic state to replicate or to do its thing. And so these are certain emotions, depending upon what they are processed through the various chakras. Fear is a good example, and that's right in the stomach. So, I mean, that's just one of the ways where fear is sort of processed in the heart too. And with anxiety, it's really difficult on the heart. And most people sort of live in this energetic space, anxious, stressed, guilty, exhausted. You know, procrastination is a symptom that the body isn't doing well. The nervous system's out of balance. And so you might say, okay, well, how do I raise my vibrational frequency? Certainly self-care is very important. Meditation, if we're religious, prayer, our hobbies, friendships. Certainly doing volunteering is a wonderful high vibrational frequency that we can tap into. And many of us don't realize that we have within ourselves the ability to make this shift. We feel like we need alcohol or eating or gambling or whatever we do, but we really don't. We can create the shift within ourselves by rephrasing and practicing more self-care.
I have so many questions. Okay.
Okay, go
Let
ahead.
let's let let's come back to the beginning. This is fascinating. Let's come back to the beginning where you talked about misery, grief, some of those lower vibrations. You said they're around 20 hertz
Mhm.
operating. And what was so interesting to me was you said, we can get there. And technically, we're not supposed to be able to manage and live and operate from that level. Yet, so many people have learned how to do that. My
Yes.
question to you is, do you think that those individuals know that they're there and that they are operating in a dangerous zone?
Well, I think a lot of people that becomes like they get very committed to that energy. And
It's
that
comfortable.
it is. And it might not, and you might say, well, why would somebody be committed to misery? but that's what feels normal to them, maybe because that's how they were raised, or maybe they're in a relationship that they're really miserable in, and they learn to tolerate it, but what happens is the body can't sustain. So maybe at 20, they can somewhat still function and so forth, but as they get older, the body's gonna start to break down because it's not enough. It's just a very low vibrational, and it's very, excuse me, energy, very, very heavy. It's exhausting. I mean, you feel like you're carrying just a bag of heavy boulders on your shoulder because it's emotionally just completely overwhelming.
As you were talking, I was thinking about people that I know, older individuals that I know that have lived that way for the majority of their life. And I'm thinking about their health and where they're at right now. And it very much reflects that.
Yes, and ask somebody if you meet somebody who's maybe 90 and just doing well. I always say, "What's the secret? Like, what do you think the secret is?" And they go, "Oh, I spend a lot of time with my family and I play cards and I go on a whatever they're doing." It's a lot of high vibrational energy that they're bringing into their lives, and they're fairly healthy. A low vibrational somebody who sort of idles low vibrationally, they quickly will go dark with a conversation. "Oh, you look great today." "Oh, I've been miserable. I've had this and that, and this is happening," and so forth. And you realize it sort of sucks the life right out of the conversation because all of a sudden now we're attaching very, very low vibrationally.
It does. It does suck the life out of the conversation for
Mhm,
sure. So, okay. So thinking about those who are operating at that lower hertz level, that lower
mhm.
vibrational level, and living in that state, that is obviously doing a number on their nervous system and
Yes.
causing much dysregulation. And my question for you is, and I don't know if you know this or not, but I was just curious, is there a vibration level, a hertz number, or something around that where happy nervous system resides? Like where do you want to be? What would actually start to heal you in that process?
Well, about 200 is neutral. And one of the things that maybe we can take away from this conversation is whatever happens to us, we can somewhat come up to some neutrality by saying, okay, well, maybe I can learn something from this. Or now I know I probably shouldn't do this. Okay, now we're getting a little bit where it's not neither good nor bad. As we start to get even higher vibrationally, we become willing. We become maybe joyful and peaceful. The highest you can get is around 700 to 1,000 when we just I think of like a monk or somebody like that that's just in that Zen state. A little bit hard to maintain unless that's, your career and maybe you've worked many years. But children will vibrate at like 510, 550. They're very playful. They love creating and being playful and so forth, which we love about children. That's such a wonderful vibration. That's why kids bring us so much joy. And so, but even everyday peace and feeling fulfilled is, it's about 300, 400. I mean, it's a wonderful feeling. And this is when we push energy out. This is when people feel light in us, or God, if you will. They feel our energy. They feel love. They feel that we connect. When we're low vibration, they don't feel us at all. If anything, we're a little bit exhausting. When I was in ICU, obviously people were very, very sick, and there's a very pulling energy because they're sick and they don't feel well, and they get very irritable and so forth. We understand that they're not feeling well. Mentally, when we're not feeling well, we're also very exhausting. People feel bad for us because we're stressed, but they're also a little bit happy when we leave and go somewhere else too. True.
Very true.
So, this
Oh,
is why
yeah.
self-care is so important because in many of our professions, it's a pulling energy. You know, we're helping other people and that pulls from us. So when we leave that situation, we have to sort of regenerate and fill our cups back up by doing things that are joy or that bring joy to us.
One of my number one things, recommendations, I guess I should say, when I'm working with somebody that feels like so much of what you've just talked about is to simply go and play and do
Mhm.
something fun because that can shift everything.
Yes. Yeah, being creative. Because
Yeah.
when we're creative, or even when we go out in nature, the mind doesn't really fight with that. You know, we go out, I mean, we don't go to paint and say, oh, what's going to happen if I painted the wrong color? We go in and go, okay, let me try a little green or blue, and I'm not sure that's the best color. Let me adjust that a little bit. It's a very freeing energy because you're trying to create something. When the mind is not, the mind is always going, number one, fear. What if this happens? And we start to predict all of these things. And next thing you know, we can't be creative.
Yeah. And, even thinking about the word that you just said, fear, you said earlier that fear is in the stomach. And I
Mhm.
find that so interesting because when we think about where some of these emotions lie within our tissue, within our energy
Mhm.
centers, and
Mhm.
fear being in our stomach is also solar plexus chakra.
Yes.
It's also the area where we feel empowered, where we feel
Yes.
self-confident. So if you are living in a state of fear, that's very much pulling and tugging on your self-confidence and your personal empowerment.
Yes, and when the solar plexus is blocked, that energy is not flowing, it's a symptom that the relationship with ourselves is not healthy. And what we'll see typically from the mental health standpoint are three things: overeating, not eating, or drinking a lot of alcohol. This is the way the body tries to scramble to feel better, but the solar plexus is blocked, and we have to figure out why it's like that. How did that happen? This is why a lot of diets and surgeries do not work for people who are trying to lose weight, because it's not that they're overeating, it's why they're overeating. Very important. The relationship within the self is not healthy for whatever reason.
So let's actually dive deeper into all of this. So you just said with the solar plexus, and for those who aren't sure, the solar plexus is located right below your rib cage, right
Mhm.
above the navel
Mhm.
area. It's your third chakra. But you said that when it's blocked, people are more likely to overeat, they or not eat or drink
Mhm.
alcohol.
Mhm.
What other chakras do you see commonly blocked, and what is typically presenting when you see them blocked?
It's one of the first questions that I ask when I first meet someone. I used to ask, "Are you in good health?" And they would always say, "Yes," but what after they gave me their medications, they were not in good health. So I've learned to switch that. So I ask what medications that they're on, and then I understand pretty much what's going on health-wise. Depending upon what they're struggling with health-wise, I can already go to that energetic chakra and just and figure out what's going on. For example, I have thyroid problems. Okay, so that's in the throat. So I already am sort of piecing together, maybe someone doesn't listen to them. Maybe they're not able to speak their truth. There's something in, maybe they've had to keep a secret. Maybe dad's an alcoholic. Maybe they've had some trauma that they've always sort of held in, and that gets stuck in the throat. So they typically will have maybe thyroid problems, gum problems, throat problems. What I see with what they go to is some sort of addiction. They'll go to something to sort of soothe that. And depending upon what they're struggling with physically, I can already sort of, now I'm narrowing down what emotion has contributed to that. A lot of not feeling at peace or childhood trauma will sit at the back, in the back. So have a lot of back pain, autoimmune sits sort of in at the base of the chakras. So understanding that there's something that has happened that now is starting to manifest as autoimmune. I have never had it not pieced together where it doesn't really make sense. It always, and I may have to be a little creative with my questions, but I automatically am understanding about what I need to understand energetically to figure out how this has happened.
Do you feel that pretty much across the board, when either a chakra is blocked or something is presenting mentally and emotionally, that is going to show up physically?
Absolutely. And for me, it's a little bit frightening to know that that's about what's going to happen. And so, yeah, to sort of be like, oh, I can predict this. For example, one of the things that's really hard for people that have breast cancer, before they were ever diagnosed, they typically struggle with a lot of anxiety. Anxiety is very hard on the heart chakra. So we have heart problems, high blood pressure, lung problems, and for women, a lot of breast cancer. And you might say, well, that runs in my family, and maybe it does, but also having a lot of anxiety is really difficult on that area of the body that affect our heart, lungs, breasts, breast tissue, and so forth.
I'll share just a real quick story with that. You know, about 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I don't know, time is kind of running together these days.
Mhm.
Not too long ago, I had discovered increased inflammation, a lump in my breast during it was at the tail end of a very long, prolonged period of time of extreme anxiety, over
Mhm.
mothering, taking care of too many things, too much on my plate, being stressed all the time. Um, and I was scared because I didn't know what it was. It ended up being okay. It was
Mhm.
fine. But I realized as a health and wellness professional myself that that was a big telltale sign that
Mhm.
something has to shift because energetically I am pulling in and showing up physical signs and symptoms, and that can lead to something really serious.
Yes. Guilt, power, and control, these are all very difficult on the second chakra. So women have menstrual problems, they have problems trying to conceive, they have irritable bowel. I mean, it's so what I understand is what emotion is contributing to this? What are they experiencing so much of that the body now cannot fight anymore? But it even I'm seeing it in people who are younger and younger. You would think at 20, but I just saw someone earlier today in their early 30s and already starting to manifest physically because of all the emotional dysregulation that she's been experiencing most of her life. We're seeing it a lot in children too.
And I want to ask a question here about children, but before we move into that, I'm curious, with these individuals that you're seeing starting to present physically with some of these mental and emotional stressors that they've been working through or that they've been encountering, do you feel, especially since you've seen both sides of the
Mhm.
spectrum, the
Mhm.
physical and the mental health side of it, do you feel that there is one better place to start to heal the body? Do you feel that it is the root cause of the emotional side, or do you feel that it should be more the physical? Let's get that squared away first and then move on from there.
Well, certainly, usually by then, they're seeing some sort of doctor to help with symptoms or management. And certainly that's very important. But what I'm trying to do is to help them correct some of these feelings that they're having or these chronic stressors that are starting to, so that this doesn't just keep getting worse and worse and worse. It can be a little bit tricky to get that, to bridge that gap because we think, oh, that has nothing to do with my depression, or that has nothing to do with the fact that I've got never really resolved my trauma. So with that, I have to be a little bit careful to try to help them understand that these emotions do have an effect on them physically, and that can be a little bit challenging depending upon how receptive they are.
And that makes sense. I think it's all about about the reception of it, and if somebody is ready and or willing to listen and
Mhm.
open up their possibilities to this being an issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it could be a little bit tough because they'll say, "Oh, well, I have this because again, it runs in my family." And so then it helps us not take responsibility for it, but but the truth of the matter is you are experiencing this, and these emotional struggles are also contributing to it.
And that's a great point. I'm glad you said that because yes, there could be genetics involved.
Mhm.
There could be
Mhm.
something else that is involved, but there's so much more. And that if you can at least look at and scratch off, you might say, the other issues, then you know what to deal with.
Mhm. It's
Yeah.
very and you gave a really good example of having the lump in your breast. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually something happens where you've got to go, "Oh, okay, what am I doing that's contributing to this?" Because, the body is really sophisticated at trying to correct itself best it can. But there are times where the mind is very convincing. The body is relying on the mind to tell it what to do, and yet it's giving the body a lot of false information because of stress and how it's perceiving things, and the body just can't keep up. Body's excreting way too much cortisol. I see a lot with women with hair thinning. It's just way too much cortisol because everything in life is so stressful.
Yeah. Well, you talked about children. Let's talk about children and how they're being affected. In the chapter in your book, you discussed the sixth chakra. It was in that chapter, the sixth chakra. And you told a story about how you work through dyslexia and believe that the energy of your sixth chakra, the third eye,
Mhm,
was possibly blocked. You talked about how you were told you weren't very smart and you had a terrible time in school with retaining information,
mhm,
which I'm sure this was very challenging on you as a developing child trying to gain acceptance and self-confidence in the world.
mhm.
Can you talk about this and how understanding and knowing your energy may really impact the health of our children
Well,
and the world, really?
the interesting thing about that, looking back on it, my dad had bipolar disorder. And a lot of that, you're not very smart and you'll be lucky to make it through school were words that he sort of shared with me because I really had trouble learning. And yet, look, when I talked about sort of looking at things in a different light, because of his mental illness, I was very sensitive to energy. Like, I was sensitive to his moods and so forth, and I realized that even though I had a little bit of trouble learning, I could also pick up a lot of things in life just by understanding the energy of the room or the essence of something. It's like something more than intellect. It was very helpful for me in nursing. Patients would come in and they looked great on paper, but they did not look good. I didn't like the way their skin looked. There was something about them that just didn't, and I would go with that. I would say, I understand that, but there's something about him that I'm concerned about. And so much, often that was exactly what would happen. So, our third eye is just is sort of, I guess, our little God whisper of something more is going on. Trust is another example. When there's something about somebody and we're not exactly sure we trust them, even though they're very kind to us, we feel that in our stomach. These are why these chakras are so important for us to realize that there's another way of interpreting situations beyond the mind is limited, but the body perceives all kinds of information that a lot of times we ignore.
Some people call it women's intuition. Some people
Mhm.
call it, the body talking to you or the knowing. But
Mhm.
I think that so often that can get poo-pooed away as just being a whatever, when in reality, it's our navigation system.
Yes. In fact, I quoted in my second book, it's we all have an inner knowing, but we pretend that we don't. Because a lot of times we know it, and in order to address it, we have to push through fear, or we have to do something that we don't maybe we're not comfortable with. So we just ignore it, but the universe is very good about that because then it just gives us another example, usually a little bit harder than the first, until we recognize the lesson and hopefully do something different.
Well, how can we use this information to impact our children or even just the children of the world in a different way?
One of the things that I'm noticing with children, they seem to, they're very intuitive. Children and animals are very perceptive to energy. And so what will happen, and they also don't can't really articulate a lot of what they want to say. They feel it, but they don't really have the language to express it. Many of their symptoms are in the stomach. So they have a lot of stomach problems, and most of many parents will say, "Oh, we have to adjust the diet and so forth," which may be very helpful, but we also have to look beyond what else could be going on emotionally that they're having these symptoms. They shouldn't have stomach pain at 6 and 7. But this is what we're seeing more often. The first week of school, I can count on my phone ringing twice as much because all the kids have a stomach ache. So, and I understand, they're going into a new classroom, they're not sure if they're gonna have friends, and everybody's got a stomach ache, and usually after the first week or 2, that seems to resolve on its own, but with children around 6, 7, 8, the second chakra starts to really develop because they start with relationships, and not everybody at school thinks that they're wonderful. And the way that the kids sort of interpret that is they have a lot of anxiety, they have a lot of stomach problems, they don't wanna go to school, they've got a stomach ache. And so we have to look at what could possibly be going on, or maybe their teacher doesn't like them as much as they feel like they should. It's important to explore that and also look at the physical. I don't wanna say ignore the physical, but also see what else it could be other than just, changing the diet or some sort of antibiotic or whatever they're gonna go to.
Well, you talked about anxiety right there. And I was curious. I mean, anxiety is such a growing obstacle for so many kids and for our youth. I mean, for those years in general, anxiety can be a little bit more pronounced. And then I feel like if we don't address it in the best way, in a healthy way, that can just permeate throughout your entire life. Can we talk about anxiety and maybe like coming back to those chakras? Which chakra or chakras are most connected to anxiety and how can we handle that?
I would say for anxiety, it's the heart for sure. Also, we feel it in the stomach. And as parents, if we really want to help our children through anxiety, we have to lead by example. If I see young children, a lot of times I'm looking to see if that's also being modeled at home. We're petrified for the kids to make a mistake or not to be perfect at school, but what we realize, or what we should realize, is when we aren't perfect, it's a wonderful opportunity to grow and learn. And when we're constantly as parents going in and controlling and protecting, it's really causing more harm than it's helping. I was just noticing the other day I have a couple clients in their mid-30s. Both it was couples counseling, both grew up with very controlling parents, and all I can tell you is neither one were very insightful, because they were never allowed to make any decisions, and now that they're on their own, neither one of them are really having a lot of insight. Making mistakes can be very helpful. And realizing that most mistakes are not going to cause, we think it's gonna be a catastrophe. It really isn't. It really just sort of changes the trajectory of whatever we're doing, and it's not life or death. We act like it is, but it isn't.
Yeah. Well, what can parents do to model um, a healthy heart and stomach, also known as the solar plexus.
Mhm.
What can parents do to model that in a healthy way for their kids? And or what can adults do just in general
Mhm.
to improve that?
I think if I could give you one thing that I think would help immensely, the society and everybody's overstimulated. And I think that we have to think about that when we're constantly, the mind is very active and we're constantly, I don't know, scrolling and screen time and so forth. The body's in its sympathetic nervous system. The mind is very active. And what happens with that is we're not spending as much time in parasympathetic with kids playing and so forth. I'll go to a restaurant and I'll notice, the families, the kids are on their devices, at the table, and the parents are both looking at their phones. And it's way too much stimulation. It's causing a lot of anxiety. It's causing a lot of urgency, constantly having to be on. We very rarely will just sit and be. So, if I had to give advice to anybody, I would say be careful with the screen time. The young kids will say, I stay on my phone until I literally drop it and fall asleep." And I'm thinking, "Well, that can't be healthy for you."
No, in so many ways.
Mhm.
Do you feel that the overstimulation is one main theme that will help to balance out your energy as a whole, from bottom to top?
Yes. I think that that's a good place to start, because when the body's in balance, as far as the nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, doing and being. And when I was younger, we didn't have so much stimulation. So we were very busy sort of, going up and down the neighborhood and visiting with friends and so forth. We had to be more creative. And although technology's amazing, I mean, it's really afforded us a lot of wonderful things, it has also, if used too much, it can be harmful, like anything. I mean, exercising is wonderful. Exercising too much is harmful. We have to realize that with everything, there's a yin and a yang. There's a balance to it. And I think with technology is, it sneaks right in. I monitor mine every week, and sometimes I go, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was on that much." And now I mindfully sort of cut back for that reason.
It can sneak up on you. I have a little
Again.
notification on my phone. I guess every Sunday it comes up and it pops up and it
Mhm.
tells me how many hours I had on. And when it pops up and says, "You've been on your phone 11% more than you were last week," I'm like, that's not an accomplishment. What?
Mhm.
How did that happen? you know?
Right. And it's without us even realizing it. We go, "Oh gosh, I didn't realize that." And it's interesting. We'll have a little bit of break time, and the first thing that we do is we grab our devices and we're checking whatever. I have for my own self, my first hour of the day, I have no technology. I wake up, and because it's so tempting to just get on your email and maybe check your phone and check what's going on. I really don't need to do that my first hour. That's something that I've disciplined myself to do, and because once that hour is over and I start to plug in, if you will, then I'm busy. I'm answering my emails, I'm checking this, I'm checking that, I'm answering some text messages. So I realize that that hour, even before bedtime, I also try to disconnect because I'd like to transition and get ready to go to sleep.
For those who are really taking to this and they're really interested and curious about the emotional, mental, physical connection and how things can show up, do you have any tangible tips of prioritizing where people start or how somebody can actually start to explore this and do some of the work so that they can start moving forward?
Mhm. I think if I were to give everyone a tip, it's gonna start with awareness, and I don't mean judgment. When we're acting a certain way, like, for when I notice that my energy gets what I call frenetic, I start rushing around and my phone's ringing and I'm rolling my eyes and I haven't even picked it up yet. I'm noticing little cues that I'm not in a good place. Or maybe I'm feeling the need to micromanage or whatever. That's me. That's something that I need to regulate. Can be quick to go, I don't know why I do this. But it's not to sort of be critical of ourselves. It's just to be aware of just what we need to do to get body balance. If we do it before it gets sort of too far gone, we can regulate the nervous system very easily. It's just when we get all the way down the rabbit hole, it's a little like 20 hertz, it's a little bit hard to climb out of. When the mind is so overactive that all we're doing is worry about things. Worry, by the way, if I could take anything from people, worry does nothing. If anything, it can manifest because energy is very powerful. But we worry about the kids. We worry about, I had a friend so before we even got it. That's so stressful on the body. And regardless of whether the test was good or bad, both have to be managed. So worrying about it isn't going to do too much. So I would say start with awareness and really why the body is doing what it.
I think awareness is the perfect place to start because so
Mhm.
many of us aren't tapped into the moment, tapped into awareness, or tapped into the nuances of what our body is trying to tell us. And that's really where it starts.
Yes, particularly with something like overeating. You go into the cupboard and you get something to eat, and then a few minutes later you go back to get something else, and you never say like, "Why am I doing this?" And I might say, "Well, I'm hungry, but I just ate, so I should." What else could it be? Maybe I'm just really overwhelmed, or maybe I'm really bored. And if so, I get that. That's fine. But we have to make a different adjustment. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. But many of us, we don't even know why we're doing them. You know, we keep it close by and mindless things that make us feel better. And the next thing you know, we've got either addiction or some sort of habitual habit that is.
So you have some other books that you have written as well. You have one that came out in 2023, and then you have another one that just came out. Can you talk a little bit about your books and what kind of word wisdom you're trying to spread
Mm.
out to the world?
Well, the latest release was a children's book, and I had not planned on writing a children's book, but I had a little girl come to me, age 7, who was struggling with a lot of stomach pain. Parents had taken her to a lot of different doctors, chiropractor, nutritionist, acupuncturist, and turned out she was just having a lot of anxiety. And she loves books. And as we were starting to work through her anxiety, we decided to tell her story in a book form. And it's called Getting Back to Happy. It's, I would say, appropriate for children, maybe 5 to 10. And it's just talking about how it's okay to talk to somebody like a therapist when you're going through struggles, whether it's health problems, stomach problems, problems at school, problems with friends, and sort of trying to release or alleviate the stigma of mental health for any age. So that is a book just came out about 6 weeks ago. Insightful self-therapy, I took a bunch of subjects and I wanted to write just like a daily read about some personality disorders, how they develop, forgiving of yourself, overeating. So I took about maybe 12, 15 subjects and I wrote just a daily read about why these things happen, what we can do to correct them, just just basic understanding of mental health and why it's so important. But then healing your body by mastering your mind. I always say that one's like my soul. Insightful self-therapy is my brain, but healing your body by mastering your mind was just really my story and how I learned about how the body and the mind and spirit all connect and how we can be healthier if we just sort of integrate the three. In the book, I talked a lot about my own personal story, which can be a little bit tough to share, but I felt it was important for people to know that we all struggle. Regardless, I think people think when they read a book that we don't have any problems, but we all do. So I wanted to share some of that, and then that's probably the book closest to my heart. Love the other ones too. I mean, the children's story book is just phenomenal too. Getting back to happy.
Well, I love the children's book, especially because I'm a true believer that, we can change any time in our lives, but it really starts with us as we are developing, and it
Mhm,
starts with our kids. It starts with us as kids, but it also starts with how we model to children too.
mhm,
So I love that you are influencing that generation to normalize that this stuff is okay to talk about and it's okay to dive into and it's okay to feel good. It's okay to
mhm,
feel good.
mhm. And it's okay to experience struggles, but we have to learn how to work through them in a healthy way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I will also say too, from reading your book, Healing Your Body, by Mastering Your Mind, I see exactly what you're talking about. I feel like that is just you really opening up and giving so much information about the energy body and comparing almost the knowledge and the information to how it presented for you and how it presented for some of your clients. So it's such a beautiful balance of both, but also kind of that foundation, that precursor to maybe the next book that you have out, which is talking about different symptoms.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And healing your body by mastering your mind. I think if I didn't have the medical background, I don't know that people they'd say, okay, this is your opinion because you specialize in psychology. But I really felt that it was important for me to share my story because I've been practicing medicine for over 30 years. I mean, I'm very skilled in the medical community, and I didn't want people to read it and think that I don't believe in medications and I don't know anything about regular, physical manifestations and symptoms. So I really felt like it was important. That was a really important story to share.
Yeah.
Having the licenses in two different areas.
It allows you to better bridge that gap for people.
Mhm,
Yeah. When you were saying that, it took me back. I also have a background in physical therapy. So I've done a lot of conventional Western medicine side myself
mhm,
as well.
mhm,
And I remember the one outpatient physical therapy clinic that I worked in. I remember getting to the point where if one of our patients came in and they had a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, I could almost pretty much guarantee that they had a history of anxiety and depression,
mhm.
and it was on their chart. And
Yes.
without a doubt, every single time, because I would
Mhm,
look, because I was curious, every single
mhm,
time it was. And I
mhm,
thought that was really interesting. And that I know, at least for me, started to really spark a few chords within me of
mhm.
it's something so much deeper.
Yes, there's
Yeah.
some sort of connection. And I did the same thing. I was noticing when people would put a pillow behind their back, where they would sit down and I would be like, okay, maybe some sort of trauma here. And as we started to talk about it every time, and I think in the book I said almost every time, but honestly, every time, it always connects. It's the body is just amazingly sophisticated and things just don't happen. We think, oh, well, this happens because of this. And it's like, no, that manifests from within. Things that there's some sort of imbalance that's contributing to whatever you're struggling with physically. Most people don't even I have physicians all the time that never really make the connection.
Well, and I will say to their credit, this is something that hasn't been talked about a lot,
Mhm.
especially in our area of the world, but it's also not something that is still, dare I say, accepted in
Yeah,
more of it with more open arms.
correct. And for physicians, once they're getting a patient, the symptoms and or the problem has already happened. So their job is to alleviate symptoms or pain or so forth. So they're getting it sort of late where it needs to be treated. What I'm trying to do is get it so they're not there at the office. Get them to be in a really healthy state so we don't even have to get to the physician's office. Best we can. Over time, as we get older, we're going to likely get something, but we can also maintain the body a little bit better than we have been through our emotional health.
And yay for you doing that.
Mhm, thank you.
We need more of that.
Mhm.
So, your books, where is the best place for people to grab them? Where would you say that people should go? I will have all the links down in the show notes.
Well, one of the things for the listeners listening on the show, they can go through my website and email me, and I'd be happy to mail them a copy of a book. That would be my gift. So thank you very much for listening in.
Oh, thank you.
Amazon, you're welcome. Amazon also, everything that we get now is on Amazon, it seems. But Amazon has copies of the book. But I'm happy to mail a copy. I mean, it it's a gift that I enjoy and I get so much in return by just sharing the book. I mean, I have people from all over the country and even one in South Africa that reach out that have read the book and that was the purpose of it. Certainly, it's not really to make money or to get notoriety. It's to share your knowledge to help others, hopefully in a positive way.
Well, this has been such a delightful conversation, and I love that you are expanding out and breaking down some of the walls and bridging the gap for people. Where can people find you? What do you have going on in the work that you are doing right now, and what's new?
Well, I think the easiest way is to go to my website, which is deniseschonwald.com. On the website is a 10-question mental health quiz. A lot of people like that just to sort of get a good understanding of how you're doing as far as mental health. Are you healthy? Are there some areas that you could be working on? I will get a copy of that quiz. I will reach out, but that's it by email. Certainly, if others would like to make an appointment with me, I accept most insurances. My calendar is on the website, makes it very easy. I am licensed in the state of Florida where I live, but I'm also licensed nationally. So I can see clients across the United States. Makes it very nice and easy and convenient when you can do that from the privacy of your own home. My books are available. My cell phone is on the website. I'm happy for people to call me with questions. I'm a family mediator, so I work a lot with families, do a lot of couples counseling, individual, work a lot with clients who are chronically sick or maybe going through cancer, chemotherapy. That's a little bit where my nursing background comes in handy, just so as I have a very good understanding of what's going on and so forth as far as the medical side, which is important too.
I love that. Yeah, and all of those links will be down in the show notes so that you can easily get a hold of Denise and reach out to her about working with her or the books or just what you're loving about this
Mhm.
conversation.
Great.
Denise, is there any last words, anything that you want to lay onto the heart of the listeners?
I think if I wanted to just give one little bit of advice, is to not go through life's challenges alone. I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for well over a decade. I have a therapist. I think it's important that just because we're in the field and just because we have a very stressful life as parents and as we're working and with our parents and being parents ourselves, it's important that we have somebody to talk to. And I really encourage, it doesn't have to be me. If you have your own therapist, that would be great. I would certainly be happy to help, but just try not to go through these struggles alone. This is why we're here, all to help each other.
Very well said. We're all here to help each other. It doesn't have to be a solo journey.
It doesn't.
Mm. Thank you so much for all that you shared today, Denise. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.